Buying or selling a home is one of the most important decisions you'll make in your life. Let my award-winning team of professionals help you.
Call the Holly Ritchie team today for a free market analysis.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me tonight on another edition of Spanning the Need. Tonight, we're going to talk about weather, news, and just life in general. And tonight, I have Eric Wilhelm, meteorologist for WFMJ. Eric, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me tonight.
Good evening. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. And don't worry, everyone will want to know what the temperature is going to be for the winter. We'll talk a little bit about that here shortly. Well, Eric, why don't you, and Pete, you've been in the news and been in FMJ. Talk about kind of how you got there. Kind of talk about your career and how you got to FMJ so people kind of get to know you.
Sure. Well, I've been at WFMJ now for 8 years and about a month. So I came in the fall of 2012. Prior to that, I spent the first 11 years of my career at a company called AccuWeather, which is over in the middle of Pennsylvania, near Penn State University. It's kind of a private firm. Its main competitor, if you will, is the Weather Channel. But most of what I did at AccuWeather was actually not on camera. Most of what I did was almost kind of in this format, almost a radio format. So I did that for 11 years, and I'm originally from Ohio, so I wanted to try to get back a little bit closer to home. Prior to starting my career, I graduated from the Ohio State University in 2001.
Add that in there. Add that in there.
We have to do it. We can't resist.
Yeah.
OHIO. That's right. So 2001, I graduated, and to get a degree in meteorology in the state of Ohio, you either have to go to Ohio State or Ohio University down in Athens. Back when I was at Ohio State was the only school in Ohio offering a 4-year bachelor degree program in meteorology. So you can't just go anywhere for this degree. You can take weather classes some places, such as at Youngstown State and Kent State. But to get a degree, there's not that many places you can actually go to. So I went to Ohio State and then AccuWeather, and now 8 years and counting, here I am at 21 News, WFMJ.
Well, and let's talk about that. How is that change from AccuWeather, which, like you said, is a pretty big organization, to on TV meteorologist? How did that kind of about, and was it an easy change?
It was a pretty easy change going on camera in a full-time basis, even though that was not my main gig at AccuWeather. Stepping in front of the camera after 11 years of not only forecasting the weather, but also broadcasting the weather, just kind of more behind the scenes, speaking into a microphone rather than in front of a camera. That taught me really well how to ad-lib and just talk about the weather for minutes at a time without stammering and stuttering and that sort of thing. And without that experience initially, mostly in radio, TV probably would have been a little bit harder. Now, I did do some on-camera work at AccuWeather, and I was even on some national news programs briefly back in the day. But my main gig was showing up in jeans and a t-shirt and broadcasting forecasts on radio stations all over the country. So I would be on in New York City 1 minute, then I'd flip a switch and I'd be on in Houston, Texas, or Los Angeles or something like that. So it was kind of an interesting change also from a geographical standpoint. Now I can just focus on one area, which is great. At AccuWeather, I had to be in touch with the weather across the country. I had to be in touch with geographic details that are specific to certain markets. I could tell you the name of streets in Houston, Texas, even though I've never been there, and things like that. Whereas here, I can really hone in on our 5-county area and really get to know it really, really well.
Just to follow up on that, did you ever get the weather wrong? Well, that you were giving the weather in New York when it was supposed to be in Arizona on accident?
It happened one time, and it was actually pretty late into my 11 years at AccuWeather. I think it took me 10 years to do it. But one morning, I worked the morning shift, which meant I was getting up at 2 a.m. And one morning, I wasn't quite awake enough yet, and I'm on the radio in Detroit. And the station I went to after Detroit was New York City. Well, I got a little ahead of myself, and in Detroit, I gave the forecast correctly, but then when I signed out, I said, I'm Eric Wilhelm on 1010 Winds, which is the New York City radio station. And so that was an oops, and I certainly was not the first, nor I was the last to do that, but it did take me a while to finally make that mistake, bleary-eyed, probably at 4:30 in the morning on a Sunday morning.
Oh, I can imagine. I mean, you're getting up at probably 2 o'clock. You have to be in the office by 3:34, just as your counterparts have to do in the morning show, WFMJ Today.
That's right. I don't miss that shift at all. I did it for a long time, and you never know when to eat. You never know when to sleep. No one knows when you're sleeping. Everybody's afraid to call you because you might be sleeping. My current hours, I of course work evenings, and those aren't great. It's not like I'm working 9 to 5, but it's a lot more preferable to getting up at 2 in the morning. That's for sure.
Well, and I think anything would, to a point.
Yes.
And you just got to be that person that does that correctly. Well, and let's talk about that. Like you've been with FMJ for about 8 years, and now we go into January, we go into February. Now we're into March with the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Has the pandemic changed the way you've kind of gave the weather at all? Since without the pandemic?
On television, not really. The behind the scenes stuff has changed. I do a lot more work from home now. I can remotely log into our weather computers at the office and do pretty much all of my job from home, with the exception of being in front of a green screen on TV. And actually, there are some TV meteorologists across the country who are doing that. They've set up a home studio with the green screen and everything, and they've got a real nice setup. That's not really all that feasible for me. So I still go in to the office, but for a much shorter period of time than I did before March. And so from my home office here, I can do just about everything except be on TV.
So then you can get up at 7:30 and walk down to your office at 7:45 with your cup of coffee.
Exactly. It's not a problem.
Well, and I think that's kind of, in talking with past people in the news industry, that everything has kind of changed with the pandemic. And people know that how news has changed because you can't really interview people in studios anymore. You can't really do much of anything. So and we know technology has really changed the way we do stuff, especially in the weather business.
It really has.
Kind of talk about kind of when you started to like, hey, this is where we are today, and how technology has helped us, the awareness of weather.
It's incredible how much has changed. And, I've been a meteorologist now for 19 years. A lot of people have been doing this a lot longer than me, but I've been doing it for long enough now that I've been able to see some pretty enormous changes. When I was an intern in college 20 years ago,
remind me.
Yeah.
That's about when I was in college. Yeah.
Yeah. And back then, you don't think of 2000 as like the dark ages. But in some respects, it was. When I was an intern, I had to render a computer model graphic for the TV meteorologist I was working with. Now, that same basic kind of graphic I do instantaneously. But 20 years ago, I had to click and start the rendering process on that an hour before the newscast, because it took 45 minutes for that thing to ingest the data and to animate and look pretty for TV. Now it's instantaneous. So the graphical element of things has changed enormously. The graphics just, of course, look a lot better than they did 20 years ago. We can do a lot more things than we could 20 years ago. Everything looks you go back and look at some news footage of newscasts from 15, 20 years ago, and it looks like the 80s, really. It really looks like forever ago, and you think about it, it wasn't that long ago. When it comes to forecasting the weather, there's been technological leaps and bounds with that as well. We now have these very high resolution satellites orbiting the globe that produce images every minute that are really super high res, and just like our camera phones have gotten much better, those satellite pictures, the resolution has gotten enormously better. It can tell us a lot more things. Radar technology has really evolved, and it's kind of manifested itself especially like in severe weather situations. We're able to warn the public now of severe weather and even isolated tornadoes a lot faster than we could 20 years ago, partly because of that advance in radar technology. We can see a lot more stuff instantaneously now compared to when I first started.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about that. And what people may not understand is when you have severe, even a tornado, and that tornadoes have been hitting Akron area, Cleveland area, and they're coming down. You guys are now staying online more now. Like there's no timeout, or I should say there's no rest. No matter if it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Am I correct on
Sure.
that? Talk a little bit about how that works, and people may not understand. Like, hey, when there's something going on, you guys have to be there. So it's almost like you're on call 24 hours a day, not just your normal shift.
It really is. Weather's a 24/7 business, and thankfully, thanks to a lot of the advances in forecasting prowess and technology, we usually know when we need to really be aware of what's might be coming. So very rarely does severe weather catch us by surprise. So if we have a situation where it looks like there might be storms at 1:30 in the morning, a time of the day when usually no one's there, then we'll plan accordingly. It's not often that we're just totally surprised by that. So but of course, around here and in most places, severe weather is the most common in the afternoon and early evening. And so that's a more humane time of day when we can staff up much more easily. And when it comes to covering severe weather, that's one thing that hasn't changed that much on the television side in a long time. If there's a tornado warning, we're on TV. And that was the case 20 years ago. That was the case 25 years ago. What's changed, of course, is the internet. And now not only do we need to be on TV, but we need to be on Facebook. We need to be on the website. We need to be on the app. We need to have social media covered. We have to keep a lot of plates in the air all at one time, and it can be a big, big challenge. I kind of think it's a lot of fun, but it can be a big, big challenge to make sure you're serving all the venues in which you're expected to be on if the weather's really impactful.
Well, and let's take example the tornado. I think they called it a tornado up by the airport maybe early, I'd say maybe a year ago. I could be wrong.
Yeah,
in Cortland area, I think it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And talk a little bit about, hey, did you know it was coming, and just kind of talk about like what steps you guys take. Because I think people think that sometimes meteorologists are like, I'm just going to go on the computer and I'm going to make some nice graphics and I have all this tech. And I think people do. And I really do. Talk a little bit about that and kind of like, hey, no, this isn't kind of a little bit more entailed than that.
It's a lot more. And, it's just one of those cliches when it comes to meteorologists and weather on TV. These cliches date back to the 50s and they haven't changed that much. So, I've heard every joke and cliche in the book. And, everything from you guys are just guessers and throwing darts at a dartboard. And boy, I wish I could get paid and be wrong half the time and, all that stuff. When it comes to severe weather, when it comes to severe weather, we look at a lot of things, and it ranges from what's going on right now. Look at the satellite, look at the radar, analyze the current situation, and then we look forward with the help of some computer modeling. And just like I was talking about the satellites being a lot higher res and that sort of thing, computer models are also much higher res and much more detailed than they used to be. All computer models are wrong. None are exactly right, but some are useful. And so we try to discern which ones are most useful and which ones have the best handle on the current situation. And when it comes to predicting where exactly a tornado is going to drop, that's impossible at this point. Even in 2020, we can't do that with more than 5 or 10 minutes lead time. But we can tell what kind of environment might be conducive or favorable for tornadic activity even days ahead of time. It's just pinpointing exactly where a tornado might decide to form and where it might then lift back into the cloud. That's technology that might be 50 years away at this point.
Well, and we talked about that, and there was one funny thing I read about you is that they call you the weather geek. And talk a little bit, explain that.
When I came to WFMJ in 2012, one thing I was a little bit frustrated by with my new job was I didn't have enough time on TV to really say everything I wanted to say. And I am a weather geek. If there's one subject on the earth that I can talk for 20 minutes about without a problem, it's the weather. Weather's different every single day. There's always challenges and interesting things to find. Even if we have a sunny 7-day stretch of weather, I'm going to find something interesting to talk about. On TV, I'm limited to 2.5, 3 minutes, and I've got a lot more to say than that. So early on, I started posting online long-form videos on YouTube, on Facebook, that sort of thing, in which I had no time limit whatsoever. I could geek out and show some stuff that I'd never show on TV. And we titled it Weather for Weather Geeks. And I've been doing those videos ever since. That was in early 2013. So almost 8 years now of that video. Sometimes these videos are 10, 12 minutes long. Sometimes when the weather's quiet, it's 4 or 5 minutes, but it's still longer than my hits on TV. And I've been really amazed and appreciative of just what kind of an audience those videos get and how many geeks there are out there. There are a lot of people out there who are kind of weather nerds. They didn't go to school for this, but they're the kind of people that have a rain gauge in their backyard. And they're the kind of people that go out with the ruler and measure the snowfall and tell me all about it. And that sort of thing. There's a lot of people out there that are like that. And those people really, I think, appreciate the detail in those videos. And there's a lot of people whose livelihood depends on weather. And in a 3-minute weathercast that's aimed towards just a general audience on TV, they might not get the kind of detail that they need to make decisions for their business. Maybe they're a school administrator. Maybe they're maybe they plow people's driveways in the winter for a living. And so that video also is geared towards those kinds of people who just need more stuff. They need more details. And so we called that Weather for Weather Geeks. And I'm proud to call myself a weather geek. That is for sure. I have no problem calling myself that.
Is this something you wanted to do when you were younger?
I got
or
the
did
bug.
this kind of just happen?
I got the bug pretty young, probably about 7 or 8 years old. Most meteorologists, if you ask them what got you into the weather, most meteorologists can point to a weather event. They'll say, when I was a kid, we had this huge blizzard or a tornado hit my town or something like that. For me, it wasn't really one event. I kind of had a boring childhood weather-wise. I never saw a tornado. I never really had a blizzard and that sort of thing. I got into the weather partly because in the mid-'80s, the Weather Channel was coming along. And when my cable system got the Weather Channel, I was like, a whole channel for the weather? Let me check this out. I thought that was really something. I really loved, back when people read newspapers, I really loved the USA Today. Most newspapers back then were in black and white. Back then, USA Today was the most colorful paper, and the weather page on the back of the USA Today was just really colorful with cool maps. And I
remember that.
Yeah,
I remember that.
I got a kick out of looking at that. And so between that and the Weather Channel, that just sort of stirred my interest. And then once I got into high school and started thinking maybe I might want to do this, when I went to my guidance counselor's office in my little small town, high school, and told them I want to be a meteorologist, they didn't know what to do with me. They never had anybody come to them and say that. So they had to really do some research on where does this kid go to school? How do we guide this kid in the right direction? Because it's kind of an unusual major, that's for sure.
Well, and you see a lot, and you're talking about the little quirky things people say, like if I was wrong as much as you, I'd be getting paid and everything like that. It's a fun thing because I remember back 20 years ago watching people. That's not the weather. I wish I could be wrong in my job. Just the quirkiness of it.
Sure. And weather is a fickle business. We're very accurate, and we for the most part are going to get it right most days. But there's going to be days that the atmosphere has a few curveballs for us. And when you're watching your local TV presenter on TV, even if in some bigger markets, even in your Chicago's and New York Cities of the world, there's going to be a range in skill level of the person that's presenting the weather to you, ranging from a chief meteorologist who's been doing this 50 years to maybe a more recent college graduate. And even in some cases, they might not even have a degree in meteorology. There's some very skilled weather presenters out there who did not go to school for this. They kind of stumbled into it, if you will, during their career. They might have pinch hit for a meteorologist one evening when they were shorthanded and thought, well, I'm pretty good at this. I kind of like this. And they ended up doing weather full time. And so you have a big range, and just like in a lot of professions, you have a big range in expertise and skill level. And so sometimes people's opinions of all TV weather presenters are formed by maybe the person they saw on a weekend who was brand new at this. It happens.
Yeah, and we totally understand that. Well, you've been here at FMJ for quite a while. What has probably been the biggest impact in regards to weather that you've seen in Northeast Ohio or the Mahoning Valley in that time?
I've liked to say that the weather since I've been here has actually been, for the most part, kind of boring. We haven't had an enormous, like you're going to remember this for the rest of your life, snowstorm since I've been here. We haven't had a flood situation that is crazy impactful that is going to go down in the record books for our region. We've had our snowstorms, we've had our flooding, we've had our tornadoes, but we haven't had a 1985 Niles tornado, the F5. We haven't had something. Yeah, that's kind of the benchmark tornado for our region. Everybody knows about that. Everybody knows about the blizzard of '78. This is actually this week is the 70th anniversary of the famous 1950 snowstorm that is the biggest snowstorm on record for our region. It occurred in November. That occurred around
Thanksgiving.
Week of Thanksgiving in 1950. They played the Ohio State Michigan game during that blizzard. It's kind of a famous game down in Columbus. We haven't had events. Yes, indeed. Low scoring affair. We haven't had those kind of benchmark events in my 8 years here. They'll come, no doubt. But I've had a run of, I don't know if it's luck or what, but I've had a run of pretty quiet weather in the grand scheme of things since I've been here. We've had only 2 cold winters since I've been here, and it's been 5 years since it's happened. We had a cold winter in 2013, 14, and 14 into 15. Ever since then, we've had pretty ho-hum winters. And the severe weather around here, while we've had some, we've had our tornadoes, it's been run-of-the-mill stuff for the most part.
Well, and let's talk about that. You briefly talked about kind of the news and what kind of your expectations have been and that. What are some of the key fun things around the studio that people really haven't seen that have been just fun things that maybe people don't know about behind the scenes?
People always, whenever they tour the studio, back before COVID, when some people might come in and want to see the studio, people always remark how small it is. On TV, we use a lot of different camera angles, and you'll see the anchors at different what we call venues throughout the studio. But then you walk into the space, and it's actually a pretty small room.
Correct.
People always get a kick out of the green wall that the weather people stand in front of. You see me stand. If you watch me on TV, you see me standing in front of these fancy weather graphics. Well, that's not actually behind me. What's behind me is just a blank green wall. I have monitors on both sides and a little monitor under the camera that I can sneak a peek at. But otherwise, it's a little bit of TV magic. And so we have to get good at turning and gesturing where we want to gesture when what we're gesturing at is not actually on the wall behind us. So I can't, hunt for Austintown, and I can't go, oh, Austintown, here. I've got to go right here. It's raining in Austintown. And people are kind of impressed and amazed by that. It's one of those things that once you get the hang of it early on, it's actually not that hard. But people get a kick out of that. The fact that our cameras are robotic, we don't have camera people anymore. That was phased out not long after I got here. And so someone is just hitting a button back in the control room and making the cameras go to a certain point in the studio. So sometimes we might be showing some people around or doing a tour, and the camera will just suddenly start moving. And people are always kind of amazed by that. And it almost seems like the camera's chasing you sometimes. But that's just, that's life in a technology age in which, unfortunately, that used to be someone's job. And now, it can be done with a couple of pushes of a button and some programming back in the control room. So little things like that. But one thing that is very, very common for people to say is, boy, this place looks small. I didn't realize how small it was.
Is that the question that people ask you all the time? What's one of the most, just in general, what's kind of like you go out and you're in the community, what's probably the most one question that people ask you the most?
Probably just how do you figure out the weather? And that's a very complicated question.
That's a loaded question.
It's a very loaded question. I'll get that when I'm talking to third graders. And, how do I answer that to a bunch of 9-year-olds? That can be a challenge. But it's a combination of experience, of course, knowledge, and a lot of the technology that, as we've discussed, has come a long way. It's a formula that isn't the same from day to day. It depends on the situation. If I've got a snowstorm coming in 3 days, my forecasting routine for that day is going to be different than on a sunny summer day. And so I get asked that a lot. Just how do you figure it out? Some people just assume that we are just taking the National Weather Service forecast and just presenting it on the air. We're not doing that. We are forecasting the weather ourselves with no help from any other agency. And so it's kind of a mystery to some people. How do you do that? And it's a pretty complicated answer.
And I'll have to ask this, but this really wasn't on my question list, is who's allowed to give warnings and advisories? Are you guys allowed, or is it just the National Weather Service?
The National Weather Service issues the official warnings, watches, advisories. Our area is served by both the Cleveland and Pittsburgh Weather Service offices. So they issue those. We will react to the issuance of those in 99% of cases. Now, there'll be some cases that are rare in which I might see something before the Weather Service does. I might see a signature on the radar that looks like maybe that storm's trying to rotate, and that might prompt me to jump into action before a warning is issued by the Weather Service. But the Weather Service is full of very skilled and very good meteorologists, and usually they're going to be on top of things pretty fast. But so we won't, 99% of the time, we won't jump on the air with some sort of weather alert until a warning is issued by the National Weather Service. So we don't issue those warnings, and we get occasional hate mail and things like that for interrupting people's shows. Why did you issue this warning when it wasn't impacting my neighborhood and stuff like that? And we don't issue the warnings. But
no,
yeah.
Well, and that's just that calls. I get it.
Yeah. People get upset. People get upset when it doesn't impact their neighborhood, but people have got to keep in mind that there might be a neighborhood half a mile away that it's getting ripped apart. Have some sympathy for those people, and maybe missing Judge Judy is not the biggest deal in the world.
That's why they have DVRs.
Yes.
Well, and that's a good thing that we talk about is the weather. You were in college 20 years ago, like I was. You've seen weather through the area, through the United States, and just through North America change.
Yeah.
Do you? And I'll ask this question, but you don't have to answer it. Are we really experiencing climate change?
For sure.
With temperatures rising, and I mean, like you said, we've only had 2 cold winters in the last 5 years. So you think we're getting climate change?
Absolutely. It's 100% it's a fact at this point that not only is the climate changing, but that we're seeing impacts here locally. Now, our impacts, because we're in Ohio and not near an ocean and not near the poles, our impacts are not going to be as extreme and obvious as a place like Miami, where the sea level rise is going to be a real threat to humanity. Even New York City, places like that. But around here, when you look back at the weather records for us here locally, it's not just the last 5 or 10 years. Our winters in particular have been warming at a rapid pace in the last few decades. Now, of course, weather records go back a lot farther than the last few decades, and a lot of people will, when they're trying to be a contrarian or debunk climate change and that sort of thing, they might say, well, what about the 1930s? No one was talking about climate change back then. We had the Dust Bowl and things like that. That's a really easy one to debunk because while Eastern North America was hot in the 1930s, the rest of the world was not. And now the whole world's on fire, basically. There's almost nowhere on the earth that is cooler than it was, a couple of decades ago. Here locally, I would point to winters being milder on average. We're going to still have cold winters occasionally, but more often than not, in this warmer climate, winters are going to be more benign than they used to be. I would also point towards precipitation here locally. While we haven't had much snow the last couple of winters, overall precipitation, rain, snow, the whole 9 yards, is noticeably higher than it was a few decades ago. And that manifests itself in more flooding events, even minor ones. But you can point to those two things, and that's good hard evidence that things are a little different around here, that's for sure.
Well, and let's do that. Let's predict the 2021 winter. What's the prediction for the 2021 from December to we get back to spring? Are we looking at a winter snow?
We did the official winter forecast almost a month ago now, or actually 3 weeks ago now. It was just after the election in early November, and the forecast I went out with will make people who don't love snow pretty happy. We're expecting a pretty benign winter again, with below average snow, maybe more than last year, but that's not saying that much because we had so little last year. But we probably will see more than last year, but still below average. And temperatures will probably be an even bigger story. It's going to be hard for there to be sustained cold weather this winter. Yes, we'll have our shots where it gets cold for a few days like we do every winter, but the kind of stuff the last couple of weeks, like we had in winter 13, 14, 14, 15, and then of course back in the late 70s with some of those harsh winters, I don't see that happening this winter. In fact, we could have long stretches, especially in January and February, where it's just remarkably mild outside for January and February. December might end up being our coldest month compared to the average, and I'm not expecting even that cold of a December. But out of the three kind of main winter months, December might be the coldest compared to average of all three.
And I was young. We didn't have cell phones or the internet back when I was young, and we loved going out in the snow.
Yes.
And play snowball, build a snowman. That snow was there for weeks.
It was, and our memories tend to be kind of maybe clouded a little bit by what happened when we were a kid. You look back at the weather records, and for people our age, I'm deducing that you're about my age. You look back at the weather records.
I'm 40, so I'll just say that.
Yeah, I'm 42, so we're in the neighborhood.
The winter 29.
Exactly. We look great.
No, we both look good.
I could do a lot worse. The winters back when we were a kid, when you look at the weather records, weren't anything to write home about, really. They weren't like the winters of the mid to late 70s. But that being said, when you're a kid, a few inches of snow seems like all the snow in the world. And because back in the 80s, cold tended to stick around a little longer, the snow would stick around a little longer. You might go a couple weeks where it doesn't snow hardly at all, but the snow you picked up a couple of weeks ago was still on the ground. That sort of thing, I think, happened more often in those winters 30 years ago as compared to some of our more recent ones.
Yeah, that's just interesting. So what do you, and since you seem to know a lot about weather, what do you think the biggest impact of climate change is? Your opinion. I'll just leave it at that. Not.
When you look at globally, it's going to be the sea level rise probably. So places that are near coasts, a pretty enormous impact on lives and property will probably occur in the next 70, 80, 100 years. Here locally, kind of like we talked about, our changes tend to be more subtle, but you can expect more and more precipitation events. The chances of any precipitation event being one that produces flooding will go up. That doesn't mean that every precipitation event will produce flooding, but the chances that any routine weather event, any routine kind of rainstorm will turn severe will go up. The analogy I like to use is if you're a baseball fan, back in the late 90s, it was the era of home runs, Barry Bonds, Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa. Those guys were hitting crazy amounts of home runs. As it turns out, they were all on steroids. Now, every time...
Next to their name.
Exactly. And so every time one of them came to bat, because they were on steroids, the chances of any swing resulting in a home run were higher. Some of those home runs would have been hit anyway. They were good players. They would have hit home runs anyway. But the chances of any single pitch going out were higher because they were on performance-enhancing drugs. It's kind of the same thing with the atmosphere, because, if you will, it's kind of on steroids. The chances of any what would be kind of a routine weather event kind of going up a category to becoming extreme are higher. So we can expect more of that.
That makes sense. Yeah, and that makes sense. And we talk about that you became at FMJ, we've talked about the weather. What really makes it a passion for doing weather?
I'm constantly learning. Even 19 years into this, there's an enormous amount of stuff I don't know yet. And so I love the process of figuring new things out. I love that the weather is different every day. I love that today is Monday. I didn't look at the weather much over the weekend, but today, in about an hour and a half, 2 hours, I'll put on my forecasting cap and look at a whole range of stuff that I haven't looked at in a few days. And I'm chomping at the bit to see what the models show, see what Thanksgiving is looking like, and that sort of thing. So every day brings about challenges. Every day is different. I love talking to people about the weather in this format when I go out to schools, which hopefully next year will become a thing again. I love talking to kids. I love going to community events that involve seniors and talking to that age group about my job and about the weather. I'm very fortunate that I have a job that I don't dread going to every day. I look forward to going to work. Everybody looks forward to the weekend, of course, but I also look forward to going to work and looking at the weather and talking about the weather and talking to my coworkers about the weather and communicating with the rest of the office staff about how the weather might impact our newscasts and what we might need to do in future newscasts, that sort of thing. So I get a kick out of all of it.
And what are some of your goals over the next kind of? I mean, right now we're in a pandemic. We don't know
Yep.
when we're going to be getting out of it. It could be people were saying November 4th, which was the election a month ago. Now, I mean, we're looking at spring of 2021, maybe farther down the road. What are you kind of looking at as kind of some of your goals moving forward? It could be a year, a couple years down the road that you look forward to try to do.
I would like it once COVID is behind us, I would like for our weather staff to have a little more community outreach and really increase our network of weather spotters. We have kind of a small network now of people that we can rely on to tell us what's going on. We know these people are into the weather. They're not ill-educated about it. They can differentiate between a wall cloud and a scud cloud and that sort of thing. Some of them take some really amazing pictures and send them to us. We have that network, but I'd really like to expand it. You know, we live in our area. We don't live in Chicago or New York, so there's going to be a limit to the amount of people you can get to do this sort of thing. But I would really like to expand it, and once we get COVID behind us, really start more of an in-person kind of regimen in which a few times a year maybe we meet up with a group of weather spotters in our area and go out to lunch and just shoot the bull about the weather for a little while and that sort of thing. I would really like to get something like that going. Again, it's going to be a lot easier once we have COVID behind us, but I would really like to build our network. There's only so much we can do from our windowless office in downtown Youngstown in severe weather. You know, we've got Twitter, we've got Facebook, we've got the internet and things like that, but ground truth is so important. Hearing from people who are on the ground and witnessing what they're looking at in the sky when I'm in a windowless office, that's invaluable stuff.
Well, and I know that, and I've watched some of your guys' new casts and a variety of other ones, is that we look at that you guys have a lot of live cameras, depending on where they are. I just have to. Do you have one of those in your backyard with the temperature and everything? You got to have one of those.
I don't have a camera, but I have 3 weather stations, 3 personal weather stations. One is just an old school rain gauge that just measures the rain. The other 2 measure rain, wind, the barometer. They have rain gauges, temperature, dew point, etc. So I have my gizmos, that is for sure. And what's nice about modern gizmos is that data, or those weather stations, are connected to Wi-Fi, and so that data can be uploaded to the internet. And some of that data we have access to in our weather graphics that you see me show on TV. So like when I show a temperature map of local temperatures on TV, some of those numbers are from people's weather gizmos in their backyard, which is really cool.
That seems, because you can pinpoint, like if it's Girard, Ohio, or up in Bezetta, and someone that you can get almost an accurate temperature reading, or how much snow you've gotten.
Yeah, and you know, the only official weather measurement site in our area used by the National Weather Service is at the Youngstown Warren Airport in Vienna. That's the only thing we have, and without these kind of more personal, even if they're kind of unofficial readings, without those readings, what's going on in Vienna in Trumbull County is not really representative a lot of times of what's going on in East Liverpool or Grove City or Hanoverton or any number of places. And so we have to supplement that official data that's just at one site with some of these, albeit unofficial, other readings. I live in Columbiana County, and I can tell you that the weather down here some days does not resemble at all what's going on in northern Trumbull County. So it's nice to have more data. More data is a good thing.
Well, that's like, I was watching a Browns football game the other day, and it was snowy and windy, and we got no rain, no nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Different.
The Browns in particular have had 3 straight home games now in which the weather's been a pretty big factor. So it can be very changeable. And, you know, Cleveland's just an hour trip on the turnpike. And sometimes it can be a completely different world. Even yesterday, while it was pouring rain during the Browns game, that was when we had our dry interval around here. Now, we got our rain later in the afternoon, but it was bone dry around here for most of the Browns game yesterday.
Well, hey, we won. We're 7-3. I'll take it.
That's right. That's right.
Well, and we talk about kind of what you've done, and what is kind of like I would say a wish of yours, who would you want to kind of just interview in the Weather Center to just feel like, hey, get kind of giddy and be like, hey, I want to interview this person for the weather?
I would really enjoy interviewing Jim Cantori of the Weather Channel. He's one of the biggest names in TV weather, of course. My meteorological hero, unfortunately, is no longer with us. That was Dick Goddard up in Cleveland at Fox 8. I grew up watching him.
There a long time.
For forever, 50 plus years. And Dick Goddard is one of the chief reasons why anybody who's from Northeast Ohio who ends up as a meteorologist, if you don't cite Dick Goddard as an influence, then I'm not sure what's going on with you. We all have been influenced greatly by Dick Goddard. He and I happen to share a birthday, which I always thought was the coolest thing. So I missed my chance to interview him. I got to meet him a couple of times, but I would like to go back in time and interview Dick Goddard and hear some war stories about big storms that he's covered, especially up in the Cleveland area. But yeah, Jim Cantori at the Weather Channel has a huge range of experience with not only just being in the studio and doing regular TV weather, but of course, we've all seen Jim Cantori out in hurricanes and snowstorms and that sort of thing. So I just like to pick his brain and get some sage advice for him on not only forecasting, but communicating the weather, making sure that our product is usable to most people. We can throw out all the fancy meteorological jargon in the world and show how smart we are, but if people don't know what to do with that information, it's not all that useful. So we always could use some help in that respect. And so someone who's been doing this a lot longer than me, I'm sure could have some great things to tell me.
Well, let me ask you this question. If someone wanted to get in to be a meteorologist, to really do what you do, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, if you're in high school and thinking about college, just be aware of what you have in front of you. And to earn a degree in meteorology and then practice in the field of meteorology, you've got to be good at math. Now, I was average at math. I've skated through okay, but it was not easy. You got to take a lot of math. The atmosphere is governed by math. The atmosphere is a fluid, just like water is a fluid. It's an invisible fluid. It's not something that we drown in, but it's a fluid and it behaves a certain way, and that behavior is governed by math, and so you got to learn all about that. Just be aware that math is going to be something you're going to have to be comfortable with. And also, because things have changed a lot in the last 25 years. When I was in college, you could just go and get a bachelor's degree in meteorology, and if your grades are good enough and you're employable enough, you could probably find a job somewhere. Now you kind of really need to diversify and make yourself stand out, because a lot more people are going to school for this than did 30 years ago. There's a lot more meteorology majors out there, and the number of jobs open for those people hasn't gone up exponentially. There's probably on average more jobs than there used to be, but it's not a field that's grown like crazy like some other fields. So you've got to diversify your skill sets, learn how to code, be comfortable with every bit of technology you can get your hands on. And you also have to be a good communicator, even if you're not like me and on TV, even if you never step in front of the camera in your life as a meteorologist. You've still got to be good at communicating the weather. Maybe it's in written form. Maybe it's in a verbal briefing to a client over the phone. That's a lot of the stuff I did at AccuWeather. I talked to clients on the phone, and you've got to be good at communicating technical information in a way that people can understand. Not everybody has that skill. Some people are really good communicators, but they communicate stuff that isn't scientific in nature. You've got to be good at taking scientific data in communicating it to a non-scientific audience. So I would say to someone who might be in ninth grade who's thinking, well, maybe in a few years I'll graduate and go be a meteorologist and be on the Weather Channel. Those are things you got to keep in mind. Keep in mind the math and assess your communication skills and how good they are now and how good they might be with a little training.
And it's interesting when you talk about that. I've seen who's been in the business like Dick would be Al Roker. Mm-hmm. And they say, let's look at your local forecast. Well, then it comes back to you guys. And it's interesting when you're looking at, he talks about what's happening in certain areas, and then you come to local and they're like, oh, it's not going to rain here. Okay.
Right. Yeah. It's always interesting, those tosses from Al Roker. I when I filled in on the morning show, it's been 5 or 6 years since I've done that now, but it always sometimes those tosses from the national newscast back to the local catch us by surprise. They're usually scheduled for a certain time, but sometimes they will throw a curveball and do those early. Sometimes Al Roker or whoever it is will say something and you kind of like, I wish you wouldn't have said that. And you hate to give a contradictory message, but sometimes you've got to be the messenger of truth. And if someone says something inaccurate, maybe you've got to correct the record. Because on average, people around here are going to inherently trust what you have to say, hopefully, a little more than what Al Roker or someone else on the national level has to say about our little area here.
Yeah, that's good to know. But Eric, I appreciate you taking time. Now I'm going to get to the segment I do with all of my guests. We're going to do a little fun game called the 5-question fun.
All right, sounds good.
I just made that up, but
it's a great title.
Yeah, it is. So this segment is personal or professional, either one of the answer.
Okay.
Best experience, personal or professional?
Best experience, personal or professional? Boy, putting me on the spot on that one.
That's what I've done it to everyone. So I'm
going to go personal on this because it's the first thing it comes to mind because it's happened this year. I proposed to my girlfriend back in late August. We're getting married next December in 2021. And that was a tremendous experience. And I caught her completely by surprise. And I've never seen her so surprised and so happy. And that made me, of course, very happy. So that's a recent example that stands out. I'm sure I could think of other things, but that's the thing that jumps to mind right now.
Congratulations. I just got married about a year and a couple months ago.
Oh, congratulations to you.
Best accomplishment.
Best accomplishment, probably overcoming my nature. I'm naturally an introvert. If you would have told someone when I was in 9th grade, hey, that Eric Wilhelm is going to be on TV someday, most people would have been like, you got to be kidding me. He doesn't say a word. And so to get into this career and to communicate to a mass audience, whether it be on the radio or on TV, and be comfortable doing that, to not be nervous or anything like that, that's been a pretty big accomplishment for me, just overcoming what is my nature. My nature is to be pretty quiet and kind of introverted. And you can't really be that and be an effective communicator in the media in most circumstances. There are some who can pull it off, but to do it for as long as I have, I'm pretty proud of being able to do that.
Okay. Best memory.
Best memory. Let's see. I'll go back to personal on this one. My first Browns game with my dad. Going to a Browns game with my dad at the old Municipal Stadium in Cleveland.
Oh, wow.
I think I was 10. And it might have only been a preseason game. A meaningless game in August. But that was my first football game on any level. I'd never been to a college game at that point. And going to a big-time sporting event like that with my dad was pretty cool. And then beyond that, of course, we went to a million Cavs and Indians Browns games and a few Ohio State games as well. But the first one was really nice.
Okay. Role model. I know we talked a little bit about this, but who would be your role model? Could be the same person, but I just make a direct approach to this one.
From a professional standpoint, Dick Goddard, the late Dick Goddard, definitely is who I've tried to pattern a lot of my career and everything after. From a personal standpoint, I would point to my dad once again. He and I have almost nothing in common when it comes to our profession and our sensibility as far as work goes. He's a blue collar guy. I'm a white collar guy. But I would point to him as, when it comes to the personal side of things, as my role model.
And the last hard-hitting question. If there was one person you would want to meet, past or present, who would it be and why?
One person, past or present. I'll switch gears here and go to the music side of things. How's that? I would like to
Yeah,
meet.
okay.
I would like to meet Bono of U2. I'm a U2 nerd. Now, anybody who might be watching or listening to this under the age of 25 would probably roll their eyes. But for people closer to our age, if you're into rock music, then maybe you wouldn't roll your eyes. I'm a U2 nerd. They're my favorite band. And getting to meet the lead singer of U2 and just talk about music and talk about their career and different songs, that would be amazing.
Now, would you get kind of like a shock if you were to meet him, or would you be like speechless?
I don't think I would be speechless. I'm old enough now and used to just talking to anyone at this point that I would be okay. Now, 20 years ago, it'd probably be a different story. But at this point, my introverted side has been worn down enough that I think I would be okay. My knees wouldn't buckle too much.
Hey, you never know. One day it may still happen.
You never know.
Eric, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. You're always welcome on the show anytime in the future.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And these have been fantastic questions. Appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Check out any more interviews or podcasts at anthonyvspano.com. Be safe, God bless, and have a great night, everyone.